Welcome back into the show, everyone. We are down a man this week as Andy Sweeney is enjoying louder than life, so can't really blame him for that one. So me and Mark,
he's the smart one.
Yes, he is. So Mark and I are going to take the reins on this one. We'll start with Louisville's win over South Florida, 41-3, pretty dominant from start to finish. You had a great tweet yesterday that said, "Look, I get all the required points that you have to get out of the way before you praise the Cardinals for a performance like that." How much can you really take away from a game like that? Because I think they just did what they needed to do. Energy was there. That's all you can really do.
Yeah, I think this is the biggest challenge in a game like this. It's not like an FCS opponent or something. Like
right.
It's not nobody. The challenge is to not make too much of this, but in avoiding making too much of it, making too little of it. You know, I think any time that you play, coming off of an emotional loss like they did against Florida State, 8 days ago or 8 days prior to the game, I think you can always properly judge body language, buy-in, energy. We know what it looks like when a team does not want to be there. They didn't look like that, and I think you can credit USF. Look, they played at Florida in a far more hostile environment against a team that just barely fell out of the top 25 this week. And they played them toe-to-toe and really did a lot of creative stuff, a lot of physical stuff.
Yep.
And I think Louisville fans were right to be concerned about the matchup, and it turned out to be very one-sided. So I think you can be appropriately encouraged without sort of overdoing it and glossing it and trying to sort of extrapolate all the way to the end of the year or something.
It's kind of like the first step in what needed to happen, because you know that Boston College and Virginia come up next. Those are not two great opponents. You got to go 3-0 during this stretch. I would say one thing that kind of stood out to me was that the defense met the task at hand in terms of stopping South Florida's run game. We knew the Bulls wanted to run the ball. U of L has kind of been back and forth in defending the run, but really guys like Yaya Diaby had a great game. Yasir Abdullah had a great game. Everybody up front really controlled that game.
Yeah, I expected, and I was really concerned for Louisville's defense. When I went go back and watch USF play Florida the week before, they did a lot of really creative stuff and ended up with not just success running the ball against Florida, but like big chunks. Big plays, would catch Florida misaligned with what they did and bust off these big runs. There was none of that, against Louisville. And it's very rare, for Louisville to sort of look like the more put together, more prepared, defense and that sort of thing, to say nothing of sort of the physicality. Also encouraged by the fact that very early in that game, they went very deep into the front seven in particular. You had Kim Wilson getting a lot of reps on the edge. They played all the freshmen and redshirt freshman defensive linemen together as a unit. In stretches in this game, and they're very big with Caleb Banks and Tawfiq Thomas and the local kid, Celia Brown. Like, it was different for them to do that, and it was a little bit of a glimpse of maybe what the front seven might look like in the future, and that's good.
For sure. Malik Cunningham, he was outstanding in this game. He becomes one of 8 players in FBS history to reach 8,000 career passing yards, 3,000 career rushing yards, 4 total touchdowns. This felt kind of like a get-right game for him in a way, because some of the plays have been there, but I think he's been a little inconsistent. But this game, he was spectacular.
He could have been a little bit better. I think there was the thing that has not emerged yet is that sort of that over-the-top ball.
Yeah.
I thought he was much more under control, was encouraged and handled playing, freestyling it a little bit in space and that sort of thing, and was responsible, didn't take any unnecessary hits, didn't turn the ball over and that stuff. He missed on back-to-back plays. You had Amari Huggins-Bruce on one. He had Cooley kind of on a wheel route. He overthrew both of those guys. They probably scored, but then the next play on a designed run, he goes right up the middle for a touchdown. And he's capable of doing that. What it does feel like between last week and against Florida State and this week, I think they've made some peace with the fact that he is what he is, and that you need to play a little more schoolyardy, with him, but that you can sort of play within some basic boundaries with him and letting him freestyle a little bit, and that's pretty dangerous. And that might be the better key for them sort of as an overall offense for the rest of the year.
Yeah, you could tell his comfort level specifically when they got that quarterback running game going. I think South Florida knew it was coming at one point, and it just didn't matter because he was the best player on the field. Switching gears to Kentucky, this was a strange game with Northern Illinois. I think most people expected the Wildcats to rout the Huskies. That didn't happen. It was 31-23. It was tied at halftime. This is a little concerning when you got to go on the road to Oxford in a tough SEC stretch ahead. What'd you take out of that game?
Yeah, I think that there's 2 things to be concerned about if you're Kentucky. One, they're not protecting Will Levis very well at all, especially on like explicit kind of passing downs.
Yeah.
I thought Northern Illinois really got after him. And they're not efficient offensively. but they are very explosive. And in a weird way, kind of remind me of Louisville 2 years ago, where they gave up a ton of sort of tackles for loss and things like that, but then would have huge plays over and over and over again. They've got some real budding stars at wide receiver that sort of erased a lot of really stagnant offense against Northern Illinois. It's the first time I really felt like, oh, they're actually, they're not just working through the pains here. Like they're not that great.
Yeah.
You know, offensively, especially blocking. Now, Chris Rodriguez coming back, obviously, great running backs make offensive linemen better, you know. But I don't know how much better.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, maybe what would concern me the most.
I think that the dynamic between Will and this offensive line right now is really interesting to watch because he has, and he's been good about taking the blame correctly for this, is that I do think he's holding the ball a little too long on some of these plays, and that leads to sacks. And you watch his footwork, it gets a little antsy. And I would think that has to come from not fully trusting that unit up front quite yet. And that's something that you've seen grow with each game because we're 4 games into this now.
Yeah.
You know, when you first saw it, you're like, you know, they'll figure it out. Second game, it's like, okay, they'll still figure it out. But like when Northern Illinois is coming in and getting that kind of pressure, they sacked him 5 times in that game. And it's just weird to, I know I've said this before, but it's just weird to see UK having these issues at this point in the season.
But, and it wasn't like, it wasn't purely mental. Sure. You know, or it wasn't that Northern Illinois did anything quirky. Like, there were just some guys getting beat in pass protection and things like that. And they have not had that problem the last couple of years. But they do right now. And you know, maybe you sort of work through it, or maybe they too have to sort of make peace with, they don't have a mashing offensive line like maybe Louisville thought they had too coming into the year, and that you might have to sort of build your identity a little bit of a different way.
And I think Stoops kind of alluded to that after the game too, because he talked about like, look, I'd love a consistent running game, but right now we have a really talented quarterback, some explosive young receivers, and this is kind of just who we are. The receivers maybe were the biggest question mark coming into the year. I mean, they are dynamic out there. Dane Keyes had his moments. Barryon Brown's had his moments. Tavion Robinson is explosive. This identity shift for Kentucky, I know we kind of just touched on it, but they kind of just have to embrace this even with Chris Rodriguez back in the fold, right?
And yes, and it can be a part of sort of opening up that run game. You know, now you've got 4 games of data. Like, you'd be a fool if you're a defensive coordinator not to start taking that into account. And anytime you sort of have to play, you know, we see this with the Chiefs, where it's like they're so dynamic throwing the ball that everybody comes out and plays like a shell, you know, 2 deep safeties and plays a shell and just sort of makes them be conservative. And the real dare there is run the ball. Well, Kentucky would probably love some fronts like that where they could run the ball. So having that sort of a dynamic, and I mean over the top dynamic play making receivers like they have, and they do, 3 of them, it will buy them some space, but I think it'll probably take a couple of weeks for teams to sort of realize, oh, that's the real challenge right now.
For sure. We're going to learn a lot more, I think, about both programs coming up. We're in the thick of conference play with Louisville getting on their ACC run and Kentucky on their SEC run. We will be off next week because I will be out of town, so I'm sorry to leave you and Andy hanging. But we'll be back in 2 weeks to break it all down. Thanks for joining us.